Rain traced silver rivers down the glass wall of the city's 42nd floor, turning the skyline into a watercolor blur. Inside, under the quiet hum of an office that had seen billion-dollar decisions, Sarah Kent sat hunched over a small battlefield of 64 squares. The chessboard had become her nightly adversary, a problem so deceptively simple, yet stubborn enough to haunt her for weeks. She could dismantle corporations in a single meeting, outmaneuver seasoned negotiators before they even realized they'd lost. But this frozen arrangement of pawns and knights refused to yield. She had just reached for the White Queen when the elevator chimed, soft, unassuming, the kind of sound that usually meant nothing in her meticulously controlled world. Tonight, it meant everything. The doors opened, and in stepped a man carrying a pizza box, his shoulders squared with quiet pride. Beside him was a small girl holding a battered wooden chess set to her chest, like it was a piece of her soul. The child scanned Sarah's desk, eyes locking on the puzzle with the certainty of someone who knew the ending before the story began. And then, without hesitation, she said, in a voice so calm it was almost defiant, "I can solve that." Sarah Kent was no stranger to the art of winning. At 30, she had risen from an idea scribbled on a college notebook to the helm of one of the West Coast's most formidable tech empires. Her name appeared on magazine covers. Her handshake had been captured alongside presidents, prime ministers, and the occasional reluctant rival. The Kent Tower, steel and glass wrapped around ambition, was her monument, and this office at its crown was the throne room. Yet for all the gold-framed accolades lining her walls, Sarah had become a kind of myth to those who worked beneath her. They spoke of her brilliance like one might speak of a storm, awe in the same breath as caution. She was fair, but distant, inspiring, yet unreachable. No husband, no children, no personal photographs on the desk. The outside world saw power and precision. The inside was all corridors, with doors kept locked. Her armor had been forged early. Childhood for Sarah was a waiting room in more ways than one, literally sitting outside her father's office in a high-rise lobby, coloring books in her lap, while men in expensive shoes walked past without meeting her eyes. Her father was an investment banker with a calendar so full it seemed like a second sky hung above him. Her mother drifted through charity galas and private luncheons, seeking distractions in diamond bracelets and amber bottles. Sarah learned quickly. Attention was a currency, and love, the real kind, was a luxury item. She trained herself to excel, not to need. By the time she graduated top of her class at Stanford, her heart had already been sealed inside a vault. Success was safety. Control was survival. Now, on this rain-washed night, she sat in her fortress of glass, staring down a puzzle she couldn't break, one that seemed to mock her. She held the queen in her hand, the most powerful piece on the board, yet it too was trapped. And maybe, she thought, that was the cruelest irony of all. Even the strongest piece can run out of moves. Down on the street, the rain wasn't romantic. It was a problem. It streaked across a chipped windshield, squeaked beneath wiper blades Daniel Morris had been promising himself to replace for a month he couldn't afford. He checked the address twice, glanced at the insulated bag on the passenger seat, then at the rearview mirror where a pair of watchful eyes met his. "Seatbelt okay, kiddo?" he asked. Lily nodded, hugging a weathered wooden box to her chest like it might break if she loosened her grip. The hinge had a stubborn squeal. The lid still smelled faintly of her mother's hand cream, something soft and floral that clung to memory the way light clings to dust. A delivery run to the top floor of Kent Tower wasn't normal for him. Most nights were families on couches, college kids with textbooks, last-minute dinners for nurses on double shifts. But tonight, the order pinged in with a name he'd seen on magazine racks while waiting in supermarket lines. He pressed the accelerator with the caution of a man who knew exactly how far a tank of gas could stretch. Daniel wore his work like a uniform he respected. Clean shirt, tidy shoes, honest eyes. If there was a second life in him, the one that might have unfolded if the hospital had given him a different ending, he kept it folded away. He didn't have the privilege of what if. He had Lily, this small person with a mind that ran like water through stone, carving paths you didn't see until she'd already made them. The elevator ride was the kind that made your ears pop. Lily watched the numbers climb, counting in a whisper as though the tower might listen. She slid her thumb across the scar on the chess box, the one from bumping it off the living room table when she was 4. Some nights, Daniel would wake to the tap-tap of wood on wood as she set up endgames and muttered to herself, moving knights like they were born with their own ideas. He'd learned enough of the rules to lose with dignity. That felt like love, too. The door slid open on the 42nd floor, breathing out polished marble and the kind of silence that announces money before anyone speaks. Daniel straightened. Lily reached for his hand, then let it go, fascinated and timid all at once. Somewhere above them, thunder rolled like a chair being dragged across a far-off room. We cut back to Sarah, her office, a cathedral, to achievement sitting with the queen in her palm, and that particular stillness that settles over a person who has won too much to admit there are things she cannot. She placed the piece down again, not moving it, just setting it there, like a promise she might break. The elevator chimed, small, almost apologetic. The doors parted. They stepped in from the rain world, a man with kind shoulders and a smile that didn't beg, and a little girl whose gaze latched onto the board on Sarah's desk as if it had called her by name. He introduced himself with the simple formality of someone who has never asked for favors. He apologized for bringing his daughter, explained childcare had fallen through. Sarah nodded, distracted by the geometry of defeat in front of her. The child had already moved closer, drawn as surely as iron to a magnet. "Do you play?" Sarah asked, not looking away from the position. "Sometimes," the girl said, almost shy. The pizza box found a corner of the desk. Daniel waited, not in a rush. Not the kind of man who pushes his presence into a room where it doesn't belong. Rain ticked softly on the glass like a metronome. "Go ahead," Sarah said, half challenging, half curious. The girl set her own wooden box on the floor with a reverence that felt older than her years and climbed into the chair opposite, small legs dangling, toes searching for a rung that wasn't there. She didn't touch the pieces. She just looked. That was the first sign. A real player knows when stillness is the strongest move on the board. "What do you see?" Sarah asked, leaning in, the way people lean in when they hope for the answer that has eluded them. "A trap," Lily said simply. It wasn't smug. It was factual, like she was pointing out the color of the sky. Daniel opened his mouth to apologize for the boldness, but Sarah lifted a hand, a silent stay. For the first time all week, her mind left the quarterly projections, the competitive landscape, the constant calculus of risk. A child had walked into her tower with rain in her hair and certainty in her voice. The air in the room changed. The board was no longer a decoration on a CEO's desk. It was the only thing that mattered. Lily chose a knight on the rim and edge piece. Most players disrespect until it teaches them humility. She didn't move it yet. She traced the path with her eyes, then spoke in a quiet translation of thought to words. It looks like it does nothing, but it breaks how the other pieces talk to each other. She moved it, a small click, the kind of sound that, to a person who loves the game, is as good as music. Sarah frowned, not defensive, just encoding the consequences. She started to respond with the obvious counter, then stopped. The counter didn't work anymore. Something fragile had shifted in the position. Black's network wasn't a net, but a tangle. Lily continued, each move arriving like a stepping stone you only see once your foot finds it. There were no theatrics, no dramatic captures. It was quieter than that positional poison, the elegant violence of inevitability. Daniel watched with the soft astonishment he never got used to. She was still his little girl, with shoelaces she sometimes forgot to tie, and also this meteor you could read by if you weren't afraid of light. Sarah's skepticism broke first into surprise, then into an admiration she could not disguise. Pride would have made her argue. Integrity made her listen. The checkmate didn't come as a flourish. It arrived like dawn slowly, then all at once. When Lily finished resetting the pieces, Sarah didn't speak for several seconds. Not because she doubted, because she understood. Another, Sarah said finally, and there was something in her tone that Daniel recognized from late-night watch repairs when a mechanism finally made sense. Not hunger, not ambition, joy. Sarah set up a second puzzle denser, the kind that hides its teeth. Lily tilted her head, eyes bright but calm. She walked around the board with her mind, touched nothing, and explained it like she was telling a bedtime story. Sarah watched the lines open and close, watched Black's sturdy shape collapse under pressure that hadn't been visible until the kid found the seam. This wasn't memory work. This was native fluency. "How old are you?" Sarah asked, almost to herself. "6," Lily said, trying to hide a smile and failing. The room held a silence that didn't feel empty. It felt full of possibility, of a door somewhere in the building that had just clicked open. The easiest thing would have been to end it there. A clever child, a delighted executive, a nice story for an evening softened by rain. But what sat between them wasn't novelty. It was gravity. Sarah saw the difference first. She'd been to enough conferences masquerading as mentorship to recognize theater. This wasn't that. This was raw capacity, the kind that needs careful hands or it burns. "Where do you go to school?" she asked. "Maple Street," Lily answered. "Public," Daniel added, quiet, prepared for the look he'd learned to anticipate when genius didn't wear the right shoes. The look didn't come. Instead, "Do they have a program for kids like her?" "They're kind," Daniel said. "They try, but no, not really." In Sarah's head, A plan began assembling itself with corporate speed. She knew the names of institutions before the question had fully formed. She also knew what those places ask in return. Across the desk, the girl was happily sorting pawns into a pyramid while the rain resolved into a steady whisper. There was a moment quick as a coin flip when Sarah could have simply ordered another problem, kept it safely intellectual. Instead, she asked the fool's question that brave people ask when they are tired of their own loneliness. Would you like to come back another night and play? Lily looked at her father for clearance and received a nod shaped like love. Yes, she said. The elevator doors closed on them again. The office regained its echo. The board stood reset, patient in its square promise. Sarah remained seated long after the lights had gone into their evening dim, watching the city float in the glass as if it were a reflection of a future she hadn't permitted herself to choose. 3 days later, Sarah stood curbside outside a brick building with a paint-chipped sign and a stampede of small backpacks pouring into daylight. Maple Street Elementary smelled like crayons and cafeteria pizza, a perfume of ordinary childhood that didn't exist in towers. Sarah waved when Lily barreled out, and waved bigger when the little girl ran past her to jump into her father's arms. Jealousy flickered, then dissolved into something humbler. Not everyone who has everything has what matters. On the drive, neighborhoods change the way seasons do on a mountain subtle at first, then all at once. Corner bodegas turning to boutiques, porches to porticos, utility wires to buried lines. Westfield Academy announced itself before they parked. Clean lawns, perfect hedges, red brick with white trim, the language of legacy. Inside, the halls were galleries of winners' trophies arranged with intent, portraits in oil, light falling through tall windows like a museum of belonging. The admissions director greeted them with a professional warmth that was half welcome, half assessment. Sarah recognized it. She'd worn that face in boardrooms. Everything here was polished, down to the diction of third graders who said extracurricular without tripping. Lily took it in like a visitor on a boat tour impressed, a little seasick. They gave her a placement puzzle in a quiet room with glass walls. The chess team captain, 10 going on diplomat, watched from the doorway. Lily cracked the problem in under a minute, then tried to hand the solution back with a smile, as if returning a borrowed pencil. The adults were pleased. The children were curious. And then came lunch. White tablecloths, a handful of students who had learned early which differences earn approval and which earn laughter. Lily tipped her juice. A simple accident. A few whispers. That's all it takes. She shrank in her chair without knowing how, cheeks hot, eyes bright, with the kind of tears you fight because you think you're too old for them. Daniel stood so fast his chair legs skidded. Sarah felt something inside her, something she'd trained into strict obedience, snap its leash. She reached for the napkin. She reached for the rules. She reached for that little girl's hand. They left without the tour brochure. The afternoon light felt harsher on the way back. The city had not changed. They had. At Daniel's apartment, above the watch repair shop, life had the texture of use. Mugs that didn't match on a shelf. Carpet worn flat in the path between table and sink. The gentle heartbeat of hundreds of tiny ticking gears below their feet. Lily carried her box into her room without opening it, sat with it in her lap, drew strength from the smooth edges like prayer beads. Daniel made tea because that's what you do when there is nothing to fix yet. Sarah sat on a chair that had seen better days and realized it was the most comfortable seat she'd had in years. On the wall were pictures that hadn't been staged. A child with spaghetti on her face. A woman with a book in her lap and her hand on a belly about to become a life. A man holding a baby with a look that tells the truth. Sarah didn't belong here, and also, she had never belonged anywhere more. I thought I was helping, she said softly. Daniel nodded, not accusing, not absolving. You were, you are, but some rooms ask for a price we don't know how to pay. Or shouldn't, Sarah said. Lily came back out clutching a knight. Can we go home? She asked her father. The word landed between them, ambiguous and precise. Home. Sarah stood. She understood. A better school isn't always better. Sometimes the right place for a mind is not the fanciest chess room, but a messy living room where someone loves you enough to lose on purpose and still keeps showing up. Gossip is a currency in certain circles. It buys influence cheaply. 2 weeks later, Sarah sat at the long table with the view that executives use to remind themselves they've climbed higher than most. The agenda looked harmless. The conversation didn't. Richard Blackwood, elegant, deft, allergic to vulnerability, opened with compliments and moved quickly to questions shaped like knives with velvet handles. Where had she been spending her time? Why the visibility with a delivery driver and his child? Had she considered the optics, the potential for misinterpretation? Heads nodded. Eyes avoided meeting hers directly. Sarah answered with facts until facts felt too thin. Then she spoke from a part of herself that rarely cleared security in these halls. She spoke of integrity and human worth, of the difference between brand and truth, of a child whose mind could move mountains if a community decided her shoes didn't matter. It sounded like rebellion in a room that prefers forecasts. Blackwood smiled, like a man who had trapped a queen. He suggested oh so gently that hobbies be kept private, that associations be curated, that leadership is not simply results, but posture. We'd hate, he said, to be forced to reconsider positions. The message wasn't coded. Choose your tower or your life. Across town, in a lobby open to curious ears and tired feet, Daniel waited with a thermos of coffee and the kind of worry that wears like a second shirt. He heard enough through half-open doors to understand that his presence in Sarah's orbit had become a useful narrative for men who never liked the way she refused to bow. He made a decision that felt like pulling a splinter the length of a rib. When Sarah came out, he spoke with care, as if gentleness could make it hurt less. You don't need this fight, he said, not because you can't win it, because it costs too much. I decide what I can afford, she replied. But even in her defiance, there was a flicker. He shook his head. This isn't about money. He was right. It never had been. They ended it like adults who wish they could be children for 10 minutes to cry without embarrassment. No scenes, no slammed doors, words polished smooth by restraint. He talked about Lily's safety. She talked about duty and optics and the cruelty of rooms that measure a person by the guest list at their last fundraiser. In a different story, she would have told the board to set fire to their own table and walked out. In this story, she stood on a bridge that spanned two worlds and felt both ends tug. When she finally returned to the empty office, rain had started again. The puzzle on her desk waited, unbothered by human drama. She didn't touch it. Sometimes the right move is to walk away from the board entirely. 3 months later, a community center gym smelled like sweat, rubber, and the hopeful static of ambition. Folding chairs squeaked. Parents whispered. Kids in sneakers leaned over boards with the intensity of surgeons. Sarah took a seat in the back row in a sweater and jeans that made her anonymous for the first time since the world learned her name. She wasn't sure why she'd come until she saw Lily across the room, taller somehow, or maybe just steadier. The girl waved, then tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and focused on her pairing. Sarah remembered the night of the spilled juice and wanted to walk over and build a wall around the child with her own body. She didn't. Love requires letting people show you who they are. The early rounds were brisk. Lily played like a hand-opening calm, inevitable. Between games, other children skipped, argued about snacks, laughed too loudly. It was perfect. In the second round, her opponent blundered. Lily saw it. Everyone watching saw it. She paused. Then, with the quiet generosity of someone whose values outrank their hunger to win, she suggested he reconsider. He did. The game lasted longer. The handshake at the end meant more. By noon, Daniel arrived with a thermos and a face that had learned to carry tiredness without letting it spill. His gaze found Sarah in the back, and for a second his expression moved through surprise, guardedness, and something softer. He didn't send her away. That felt like grace. The finals came down to a boy 2 years older whose family had driven across counties to be here, and a 6-year-old who treated a chessboard like a window. The game was the kind strangers will talk about in small towns for a season. Tension that could be measured by how many parents forgot to sip their coffee. When the end came, it wasn't dramatic. It was honest. Lily saw farther. She won. They gave her a cheap medal on a ribbon worth more than gold to the right kid at the right time. The organizer asked if she wanted to say something. She stepped onto a low stage and spoke into a mic too tall for her. "I like playing," she said, "but I like my family more. My dad says winning matters, but being kind matters more." The room exhaled together. It sounded like relief. After the last folding chair clapped shut, they met near the exit, where the cold air sneaks in. There was awkwardness at first, the choreography of people who had practiced not touching. Lily solved it by wrapping Sarah in a hug and saying, "Did you see the night trick?" "I saw everything," Sarah said, and it was true in ways that stretched beyond the game. Daniel stood, with his hands in his pockets, trying to decide which version of himself to be. Sarah made the decision easier. "I resigned last week," she said, as casually as if reporting a change in the weather, though her pulse betrayed her. "I'm starting something smaller, closer to the ground, education tech, access over exclusivity. I'm done building things that keep people out." Daniel blinked, then smiled with pride that didn't claim her choice as his achievement. "You're brave," he said. "Or finally honest," she replied. 6 months later, a converted warehouse wore string lights and possibility. Laptops hummed beside stacks of dog-eared curriculum guides. Whiteboards filled with sketches that looked like constellations of ideas. Sarah's startup was not impressive in the way glossy magazines teach us to be impressed. It was impressive like a classroom that stays late because a problem is too interesting to leave unsolved. On the ground floor, the watch shop ticked. Daniel's hands, steady and patient, coaxed timepieces back to life. Customers learned that the best part wasn't getting your grandfather's watch working again. It was the conversation while he did it. People brought him broken minutes and left with something mended inside them that had nothing to do with gears. Upstairs, Lily did homework with friends who didn't care what neighborhood anyone came from. She tutored smaller kids in the corner on a thrift store rug, explaining forks and pins with metaphors about playgrounds and traffic. Coaches called from out of state. She said thank you. She said maybe later. She was busy being a kid. Evenings belonged to their table with the worn chess set that started all of this. They stopped keeping score. Collaboration felt like the right endgame for this family. Sarah and Daniel talking through positions while Lily wandered through lines like a gardener lifting leaves to check for new growth. Sometimes, when the last light switched off and only the street lamp painted their windows, Sarah would stand at the glass and watch Daniel teach Lily outside on the small patch of yard behind the building. Neighborhood kids drifted over, drawn by laughter and the click of wooden pieces. The scene was small, almost nothing at all. It was everything. Magazines printed their version of the story, dissected her departure with that strange blend of admiration and disdain reserved for women who refused to perform palatable power. They said she had traded victory for sentiment. They guessed at breakdowns because they couldn't imagine a person leaving a throne unless she was falling. Sarah read a few. Then she stopped. There are metrics you tailor to impress shareholders and metrics you learn from the weight of a child asleep on your shoulder. Only one of them determines a life. People started bringing more than watches to the shop. A man who'd lost a job and found shame too heavy to carry alone. A mother whose teenager had forgotten how to look her in the eye. A college kid wondering if purpose was a myth invented to sell textbooks. They left with nothing but comfort, and yet more than they came for. The warehouse upstairs hosted Saturday workshops, coding for kids who'd never seen a laptop in their home, chess for teens who thought strategy was only something rich parents buy with lessons, storytelling circles where people learned that the facts of their lives, told plainly, could heal a room. Sarah discovered a talent she never valued, making complex things simple without making them small. She didn't miss the tower. The tower missed her. Let it. On a quiet Sunday, rain returned, gentler this time, as if the weather had learned to speak softly to this block. They set up a study of a classic endgame on the kitchen table king. Rook, stubborn resistance. Lily explained the technique like she was humming a song. Don't rush, she said. Keep the net tight. Make the other king run out of squares. Sarah nodded, watching the shape of the win emerge not from aggression, but from patience. There it was again, the lesson that had rearranged her life. Power isn't only the swift strike. Sometimes it's presence. Sometimes it's refusing to leave. Later, at the window, she caught Daniel's reflection next to hers, a shape that had become familiar in the best sense of the word. Do you ever wish we'd met sooner? She asked. He considered. If we had, we'd be different people. Maybe we wouldn't have recognized the right move. She smiled. He was right. Timing is a player too. Night folded the city into itself. The chess set remained in ready position, not as a declaration of war, but as an invitation, a promise that tomorrow would hold another puzzle and they would approach it together. None of them pretended that life had stopped making demands. The world still measured, still judged, still asked impossible prices. But inside these rooms, there was a different economy. Kindness accrued interest, dignity multiplied, love paid out in dividends you could feel in your chest. Years later, when someone asked Sarah what changed everything, she would talk about a rainy night, a soft elevator chime, a man who carried his work with dignity, and a little girl who looked at a problem and said, not boastful, not afraid, simply certain, I can do this. She would smile then, because she would know the real puzzle had been invisible to everyone in that office. Not how to corner a king, how to unbolt a heart. The most beautiful combinations in chess are the ones you don't see until the final piece clicks and the entire board makes sense backward. That's how their lives felt in retrospect, inevitable, once they happened. The victory wasn't a trophy or a headline. It was the ordinary miracle of three people choosing, day after day, to remain on the same side of the board. If this story stirred something in you, maybe made you think about your own puzzle in life, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. What's the one lesson you'd carry forward if it were you? And if you believe more people should hear stories like this, hit that like button, share it with someone who matters to you, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Every click, every share helps us keep telling stories that remind us what really matters.